Okay, it's Roy. This is Marty Wilson speaking. I'm sitting at the Monroe County Historical Association with David Montgomery and his wife Krista, and Amy's here and Tanya's in the room. It's March 17, 2022, and we're here to talk about David's life and what brought him to the Poconos, and he has an interesting story to tell. So David, let's start with where and when you were born.
Well, I was born in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and a little hesitant to give my date because it might expose my age, but it was April 4th, 1933.
Okay.
And I went to high school, private high school in Fort Lauderdale, Pinecrest High School, and I had the occasion to meet some people that came from the north to Fort Lauderdale during the winter, and that included the Dangler family. And they had two children that attended the same private school that I was going to. That was Reese and Joan Dangler, and they became friends. And that's essentially how that started. And then from that friendship, I had an opportunity to come further north. And I did that, and I had not had any experience with what to expect because I had not been further north in the Carolinas. And my mother was quite apprehensive about the weather because she was a southern lady, and she also hated airplanes. So I wound up as a student coming up to the Poconos. It was a rather interesting experience because my mother, fearing the temperatures would be very cold, dressed me like an Eskimo. And since she hated planes, I had to come by train. So I came from Fort Lauderdale all the way to Philadelphia, and the Dangler family was kind enough to drive down to Philadelphia and meet me.
And what brought you north exactly?
Friendship with the Dangler family and the children. And I'd never gone beyond the southern states, and I was taken with the idea of skiing and so forth, but it wasn't ski season. It was too early for that. Nonetheless, I got off the train looking like an Eskimo.
How old were you? Do you remember? Are you talking about when you were in
I'm
high
talking
school?
about, that was in the early 50s, very early 50s. It could have been even 49. I graduated high school in 1950.
Okay, so you were coming for a visit then?
Yeah.
All right. Now your mom hated planes. Was she coming with you or?
No.
Okay, so how long were you here for that visit?
I don't think I was here too long, maybe about a week, something like that. It was just a brief visit and to see the area and so forth. And I was quite taken with it. And the Dangler family are very nice family. And he went on to become, he may have already been chairman of the Pocono Mountains Airport Authority, the Mount Pocono Airport, but I know he stayed with it after coming back to the Poconos and making my home in the Poconos. Roy Dangler had stayed with the airport and became the chairman and made all the good improvements. There was a grass landing strip, and then it became paved and so forth and so on.
So you came up as a student for a visit, and you were here for maybe a week, and then
yeah,
you went back to Fort Lauderdale.
And then I came back another opportunity or two and got a taste of skiing, and stayed up here and wound up marrying Joan Dangler.
Okay. So did you go to college? I think you told me.
I went to the University of Mines. I love the engineering and so forth. I thought I should have some business courses and a better understanding of business aspects, so I added that to my curriculum.
So you came back for a couple of visits with the Dangler family. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And then there was some flame was ignited between you and
the daughter Joan. That's correct.
And then you married Joan.
And then Joan and I went back to Fort Lauderdale, And we had a home there for a while, and we had a number of children. But Roy Dangler, in the wintertime, cold wintertime, I don't mean early fall, cold wintertime, would go south and went to that, sent his kids to that private school while he was, and his wife were in Fort Lauderdale.
Okay. So then you're living in Florida. He's coming down every year.
Yeah.
When and what brought you north permanently?
Well, I don't know. I suppose the fact that I wed one of his children, and she was from this area, and finally wound up buying a home up here.
And moved up here permanently?
Yeah.
Maybe 60?
That sounds about right.
And then how'd you get involved with the racetrack?
Well, when I was at the University of Miami, a number of my friends had sporty cars, like all young men do. And one of them was a fellow by the name of Alan Patterson. And he had an Allard. It was an aluminum-based car created by Sir Sidney Allard, and you could get any kind of engine you wanted in it. And he had a Cadillac Allard, and he was a member of the Sports Car Club of America, and he used to go around to various races, and I went with him and became sort of a helper, crew member, if you will. And during those occasions, I had the opportunity to race the car in a few laps here and there. I remember there were races at the Sebring Airport in Florida, and of course we went to Watkins Glen up in New York and all kinds of places. But I remember taking a few laps during the race, which I really shouldn't have been doing, at Sebring, and I had a car that had to be the fastest accelerating car of all, because there were all mixed classes of cars running on Sebring. It was like a 12-hour or 24-hour race, really a long thing. And I could pass anything. But when I came to the turns, even the smallest cars would whip by me. Better drivers, no doubt. And that was my experience with that. Anyway, I got into racing and went to, I think, the second year that the Daytona Speedway opened. By that point in time, I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if we've got Indianapolis, they're talking about building Ontario and Southern California and the Texas Motor Speedway. Wouldn't it be nice if we had something in the Northeast, and preferably in the Pocono area, because it's 90 miles from New York and Philadelphia, had a lot of good features, and the interstates were proposed at that time, and it worked out pretty well. I couldn't find a piece of land that was satisfactory. I wanted to build a multi-purpose track, combine it, have a large small oval, a big 2.5 mile track, which would be comparable to Indianapolis and Ontario, and have it so that you could race both Indy cars and sports cars, the straightaway long enough for a drag strip, the 3/4 mile tying in, so one set of stands, one straightaway overlooking the whole thing. And it just took years, never found a decent piece of land. Thought we had one at one time. It's currently known as Pocono Farms. It's a subdivision. We had an option on that to buy it, the corporation, which was formed in 1957, Racing Incorporated, with the idea of taking this project forward. But it just seemed to take forever because we couldn't find land, and you can't get financing really until you find land, because that was always the question. You'd talk with somebody with money and they'd say, well, do you have the land? Do you have the design? You know, all of that. And of course the design ties in somewhat with the land, etc. So that was pretty much the story there. It took a long time. The Pocono Farms would have made a nice road course because it had a lake in it, Echo Lake, but it didn't fulfill the basic concept of a multi-purpose track. So let it go. And then one day, Mr. Dangler, Roy Dangler, said, I heard that the Starkey brothers that own the spinach farms out in Long Pond are thinking of selling. It's pretty flat out there. So I went out there to take a look at it. It was not only flat, it had a gentle slope down towards Long Pond, and it was all cleared because it had been farmland. The visibility was just like unbelievable, and that had to be the piece that would make sense. And shortly after that the interstates came through, and they came through close enough, but not so close as to disrupt the land use that we had in mind. It was kind of an interesting thing. So anyway, I proceeded with the rest of the design, and of course, you have to get backing and support. So we got the United States Auto Club, which was the sponsors of the IndyCar races at that time. And Bill Smythe was the new executive officer. And I worked out a situation where if we bought the land and proceeded, they would, within about a year's time, hold a major race. And so everything was tenuous. It all had to come into play. And it did. But it was a lot of time and effort. Anyway, we started out by building the 3/4 mile and the drag strip. And we did the grading for the entire track. But we didn't have the money to pave the whole 2.5 miles. But we did have the 3/4 mile, the drag strip, and the little road course that tied in. So we were in business, and we had started, and that gave us an opportunity to develop operating personnel, which we needed to do. And there was a fellow by the name of Dick Fleck, who was a ex-super modified driver and promoter and so forth. And so our first event was a super modified race on the 3/4 mile oval, which is larger than most small ovals, but not as big as the super raceway speedways you get. And by the way, that's why it was called Pocono International Raceway, because it had a little bit of a challenge to drivers. It wasn't just a high-speed event. Daytona was a high-speed event, had 30-degree bank turns, and it was intended, Bill France built it. They used to race on the beach down there. Bill France built it with a view of running stock cars on it, mostly. And it was fine because the cars of that day, maybe Hudson Hornet or something, could go 110 or 115 miles an hour compared to the almost 200 miles an hour cars are running today. Anyway, what happened is the track was just fine for that, but then he wanted to get Indy cars because he had a 2.5 mile track. But the problem is they were so fast and so light that the transitions coming out of the bank turns, the cars would become airborne. It could not race Indy cars there. Our track, keeping that in mind, our track is moderately banked, so the Indy cars can run on it and stock cars can run on it. And it has 3 different length straightaways, 3 different bank turns, and so it has some variety. So it's more of a raceway than a speedway, and it worked out pretty well. The drag racing worked out pretty well until the dragsters got so powerful that there's, even on a flat straightaway for a 2.5 mile track, you have a slight pitch down from the outer edge, just so rainwater will go off. I mean, if it's only 3 or 4 degrees. But the problem is when you get dragsters and the torque from those big rear wheels let loose, the cars start to hop a little when they first pop the clutch down even that tiny grade. So we could run everything but the fastest cars on there. But today, if they wanted to, they could run the fastest cars because they're jet engine powered. There's no torque on the wheels. It's all coming out of a back engine. So that could come into play if the raceway ever decided they wanted to do that.
Huh. You said something earlier I wanted to go back to. interesting story, but you said you got into racing after telling me the story that you had driven a couple of laps in that race where you shouldn't have. So when you say you got into racing, were you a race? Did you drive competitive?
No, I only participated to help Alan Patterson on his crew. I was like a crew member for some of the races he went to, not all of them. And it was interesting because as I would go to races, and even the ones he wasn't involved in, like when I went to the second year Daytona Open, I'd already had this project in mind and was thinking of it. So while I was there, I had the opportunity to talk to the engineer that designed it, Charles Moneypenny, and ask him what the thinking was and so forth. And he told me his instructions from Bill France was to make a track that the cars could run as fast as possible. That was the era that they were starting out in. And he obviously had no thoughts of Indy cars or lightweight cars running at that time. So I also had the opportunity to speak with the underwriter that raised the money for that project. And so I wound up with more information. And every time I would go to a racing facility, I would be collecting more information. Some of the stuff that I brought, I have, for example, a booklet here that it's an update on information about the Ontario Motor Speedway from way back, just after they were starting to raise money.
Was this your career, or did you have another career that
Yeah, real estate. I was a real estate broker. Started out selling real estate, opened my own office up here, and I still am. I'm now a realtor emeritus because I've had over 40 years as a broker, and I'm semi-retired now. Unfortunately, I've reached the age and so forth that my vision isn't quite as good, and driving around is not my thing anymore. But I had a lot of contacts, still do, and I can refer those people to other agents, so I still can maintain some degree of
So you were a real estate agent, and this is your passion, this racetrack business.
Yeah.
So who was on, you said we were looking for land. Who is we? Who's in that?
Well, okay, when I started out, it was really, I had the backing of Roy Dangler, who was a strong believer in the Poconos and that anything could go well here. And so I had his support, and just a couple of other people. Then at the time, John Calhoun, who was the executive director of the Pocono Mountains. It was then Vacation Bureau. It's now Visitors Bureau, the Vacation Bureau. And we started promoting it. And then some hotel people, like George Clovis up in Mount Pocono, he had the High Point Inn. Today, there's a Burger King, I believe, sitting there, but it was a big corner on 940 and 611. Multi-story, three stories maybe, inn-type place. And we had our first publicity meetings there and invited race drivers there, and we had a sketch of a layout, which was not where we were actually going, but it was something to talk about. And so we had meetings there with drivers and editors and commentators that were interested in the sport to get their feedback and their ideas. And I took all of that stuff, pulled it together with my engineering background, and came up with the racetrack design that we have now.
So you actually designed where the banks were?
I designed it. There's a lot of interestingly misinformation out there, perhaps well-intended. But for example, we had a race car driver to serve as I don't know, I guess an overseer, if you will, of what we were doing with the design. And so we had, can I pull something out of here? So that's me, and this is a whole bunch of people out at the track in the early days when we just had the 3/4 mile track going.
No kidding, huh?
And there's some races there. This is one of our early brochures. And for really to raise money, promoting to raise money. And that's just a piece. Here's another. And here's the design of the track. And here you can see the parking area. This is Route 115 coming up to Route 940 at Blakesley. And you can see the 3/4 mile track. The 1.5 mile track came here, and there was a little arm that tied off into there. So it went like so. And then this was the bigger road course. And then this was the big oval, which you ran counterclockwise. And this is the principal guy, Roger Ward, race car driver. This is me, and this is Dick Price of the Price Ford Company.
Okay.
He's since deceased, as has he. And this picture was taken. He flew into the Mount Pocono Airport. Roger Ward was an ex-military pilot. He flew fighter planes. If you recall, there was a twin-engine fighter called a P-38, Lockheed P-38.
Sure.
He flew that, and when the war ended, he got bored and went into auto racing and took up by racing midget cars. That's how he started. And then he went on to win the Indianapolis 500. So he came over, looked at the land, looked at the layout and so forth. He didn't design the track, but I said, you know, can you tell me what you think that we can pass on? Is it going to be acceptable and so forth? He said, if you build it, we'll drive it. So that was his blessing.
So you really were instrumental in the design of the
The whole concept. This, just to show you doing history, Ontario Motor Speedway. This was a progress report. That's got to be 50, 60 years old at least. Here's Pocono and USAC reach $1 million pact. This was a Pocono Record article. Oh, and there's the Cadillac Allard. That's Al Patterson. This was red. It's a bright red car with a Cadillac engine.
That's the car you drove.
Yep, and it was all aluminum, and the acceleration was unbelievable.
How about that?
And this is me. Oh, and this is at the High Point Inn. This is Clarence Cagle, who was the manager, a groundskeeper manager at Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Oh.
We had a lot of good people come in, so we could talk about it. And this is me again. Looked a little younger, didn't I?
Yeah.
Chris Economaki. No, this is John Bishop. John Bishop from the Sports Car Club of America, who later went on to start IMSA, the International Motorsports, which held its first race at Pocono on our 3/4 mile track while we were just getting started. And this is one, just a general photo of one of people at that meeting sitting around. You can see. But we got a lot of good input. Spent some time doing that. And here is what I was trying to say earlier. Here's an aerial photograph, and you can see that the 3/4 mile and the 1.5 miles and the main straightaway is paved, but just the grading is done. Everything the grading was done for. So it's interesting to me because every now and then I see an article that says something like the raceway started out as a 3/4 mile track. They bought a 3/4 mile track and then it expanded it. No, from the get-go it was all designed, but it was built in stages because we didn't have the money or we didn't have the racing dates. So once we got like this, then I was able to get a contract signed with USAC for a 500-mile race in 1971, which is our first big legitimate race, and we had over, I think it was 74,000 people show up for that first race.
What year did you open?
Well, that race took place in 1971. We were racing on the small track in 68 and 69,
Okay.
as I recall.
All right. So by 71, the whole thing was big track was built.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it was like right at the last minute we were fastening grandstand seats down for that race. And then this is an aerial. You see the track out here in the distance? This is Interstate 80 and Route 115.
Gotcha.
Okay, and this is me, and then let's see who's here. This is Bill Smythe. This is Clarence Cagle. This is Dick Fleck, who was our track manager on the 3/4 mile track and was staying on. And I'm signing the agreement with USAC for that big race. And it was a 5-year contract, renewable for another 5 years. And those are Indy cars on the track.
Mm-hmm. So, I remember from the 70s there was a rock concert up there. Do you have anything
That's correct.
to do with that?
Oh yeah,
What was that all about?
that was a nightmare in the sense that it was successful. It didn't have anything to do with the racing, but we were trying to hold events and raise money. So we had a rock festival, and I mean, you couldn't park for miles within of the track. There must have been a couple of 100,000 people that showed up, and I don't know if they were able to collect money or not, but.
But you didn't repeat it, so something.
No, it was just unbelievable. The cars were all the way backed up to the interchanges, and cars were on Interstate 80, and I mean it was a nightmare. But at least it was something we could do. This is a copy of a letter dated September 3rd, 1969, that I wrote to Bill Smythe, who was the executive director of the U.S. Auto Club. I was congratulating him on his appointment to the executive director position. And I said in the second paragraph, I would like to summarize the concept I have for your consideration. That is to simply divide the United States into 5 geographic areas and franchise a USAC 500 miles in each area. Something of it's not printable. There is investment necessary for additional Indy-sized Indy West Racetrack. Ontario will be in the Far West track, and Pocono in the near future, the Northeast track. Anyway, I was promoting the idea of having 3 or 4 major tracks throughout the United States: Indianapolis, Ontario, Texas, Pocono, that we could have a series of 5 races that were like tied together in the winner of the most.
So how has the track done since you opened it in the 70s?
Well,
has it been an uphill, success all along?
Well, no, it ran into problems. I resigned, I think it was in August 1970. Had several investors. Had one pushing very hard who wanted to.
You resigned in 1970, did you say?
Yeah.
Before the track was finished?
No, I was still there and on the board and finished the track, and we had the race scheduled for 71. But there was this internal political pressure because we had an investor that really wanted to take over the whole operation. And I frankly was not thinking in terms of spending my life managing a racetrack. It was a project that I thought was good for the Poconos, and I wanted to see it through. So I didn't interfere with any of that. But my successor ran into some problems, and I don't know exactly why, because the events seemed to be successful. I don't know if expenditures were not being controlled or what, but in any event, the track almost went bankrupt, and interesting thing is that my successor had an opportunity to meet with Bill France, the Daytona Speedway, and said, before you panic and sell the track, because he was getting desperate, he said, why don't we do a NASCAR stock car race? Now, we had stock cars on the track already from USAC, but they were not big in name like NASCAR. So he said, why don't you do a NASCAR race? And they did. It was very successful. And they started doing more and more of those. They dropped the Indy racing completely, which I was disappointed because I still had in mind a multi-purpose track, and there's no reason they couldn't do that. But in any event, the new people ran into problems, and they had to go to another track vendor. But at least they didn't lose the track. It's still there. It can still do all of these things, and I'm very happy about that.
So I was just going to ask how you feel about the track now that, you know, after all this water's gone under the bridge and you're no longer associated, you're no connected at all to it anymore, I guess.
Well, those kind of things can happen, and I find it interesting that I'm not mentioned at all as having any connection with the track if you read stuff of past my era. But I think that's kind of maybe typical in some cases, I don't know. The track was named Pocono International Raceway. That was my choice. And I did that, not that it was unique, because Daytona International Speedway and Michigan International Speedway, they were throwing international in because they were hoping to get more than just stock car racing. You know, they were looking actually to get Formula One racing if they could, and IndyCar racing. And as I noted, IndyCar didn't work at Daytona because the banks were too high and the cars were too light and fast. But they did work at Pocono, and that's pretty much the story.
This is fascinating, and your involvement with this, it must be something that you're very proud of, obviously.
Oh yeah, I'm very happy with it. My children are very proud of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just on the off chance, is there something else that you were involved in the Poconos on this kind of magnitude or not?
No. I mean, this
It's big enough. I mean,
this took all my time and effort. In fact, probably more time and effort than it should have from my real estate business, but I was committed to it, and I wanted to see it. And once we had a signed contract, once we had a race, and once that race was held, I felt I've achieved it. So that was the main thing.
I was just going to ask what your feeling of achievement, your largest feeling of achievement was in this project. You know, what you're proudest of in this project.
That actually got accomplished, because it was extremely difficult finding the land, difficult raising the money. Everyone had an excuse, and perhaps reasonably so, as I mentioned. Do you have the land? Do you have the design? Do you have a date from a sanctioning body for your main races yet? How do you know you'll get them? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But good things happened during that. I remember one time we had put a platform out at the racetrack that was only about 15 feet high or something, but it was on the upper side of that sloping property, a little stairway up, so people could go up there and maybe be in a position of some in the grandstand, so you could get even a better idea of what you could see. And I got a call one day from a gentleman who said he had been on the grandstand, and he wanted to know if his company could perhaps tie in some way with the raceway. Well, we were always looking for that. Our first race was the Schaefer 500. We got Schaefer beer involved. So when he said that, I said, sure, what's the story? He said, well, why don't you come up, it was up in Connecticut. He said, the company's Ray Bustos Manhattan. They make brake linings. Couldn't have been better. So I drove up there. We had a financial guy helping us out by the name of Egmont Cronow, and we drove up there and talked with this gentleman, and his name escapes me for the moment, excuse me, but anyway, talked with him, and he wanted to know what the story was, and I said, well, we're grading now, and we need $250,000 just to complete the next phase. And he said, well, I can't give you $250,000. He said, but I can give you 125 this month and 125 next month. And I said, that will work.
So do they have some kind of plaque or anything mentioning you and the other people that actually created this thing up there at the raceway? Is there something hanging there?
No, not that I'm aware of. And that doesn't, that would be, I guess, some sort of honor, but that doesn't bother me in the sense that that's not what I was looking for. I wasn't looking for an acknowledgement or a plaque. I was looking to get the track completed and have it work. And
you still go to races?
Yeah, go to the races.
You have a free pass, lifetime free pass?
I think I do have a lifetime free pass, but I don't use it.
Okay. Well, fascinating story. Is there another part of this story we should have asked you about? Is there something we should have asked we didn't ask?
I don't know. I guess there's probably more little intricate details. Yeah, we almost lost the ground. We had an option to purchase it, and we had to come up with more money, and because of the difficulty raising money at that time, it was obvious that we were not going to have the money to meet our obligation to complete the purchase. So Dick Price and I drove down to Yardley, PA, which is north of Philly, to talk with the Starkey brothers to see if we could get an extension. They weren't too excited about that because they felt they'd already given us enough time. And Dick and I stayed there literally the whole day, and we finally wore them down that we got an extension signed that afternoon and brought it back, and then we raised the rest of the money. And
no kidding.
Yeah.
Fascinating story. Well, I have no more questions. If you can think of anything else you'd like to add.
Just a couple things I'll throw in there to you. On the 3/4 mile track, these are little programs. We had all kinds of races from super modifieds to whatever. This was a prospectus to raise money.
So I see you were the president. I don't think we ever mentioned that you were the president of
Yeah, I was the president. I started it. I was the founder. I was the president. Like I said, I'm not... Anyway, this was the prospectus. STP, we got involved in there, and this was a little giveaway schedule. Here's our first prospectus. I think it's our first one. November 5th, 1962. Started trying to raise money. Our first office was down here in Stroudsburg, 21 North 7th Street, right at the courthouse square. We rented an office and we were trying to raise money. We were trying to get money from hotel owners and everything by convincing them that it would be a helpful thing for the Poconos. And
Were people pretty receptive?
no, they were receptive to the idea, but they weren't receptive to helping with the money.
Right.
That was a tough thing. Like I said, we didn't have anything to go on. We didn't even have the land. And this is the digest from the Securities and Exchange Commission, again talking about our financing thing.
I see Mattioli is the vice president here. How did he get involved?
He had a investment company called Matco. He was a dentist from Philadelphia, and he was the guy that kept pushing to take over, and he eventually did, because I just couldn't put up with the pressure anymore. Unfortunately, he didn't know that much about auto racing and so forth. He did his best. He went through some hard times, and eventually got a call from Bill France, who saved the day because the track was near bankruptcy. But, and I'm also in the process of summarizing a history, some of the things I've told you.
Are you writing this down?
Yeah, I'm writing it down. I make notes and put them in there. Some event. This was a note that on January 15th, 1963, I went to New York City and met with Esso, the gasoline company.
Oh, yeah.
And they rejected any interest. But that's all part of it. And I have an extra copy of this if you want. This is a copy of my letter to, maybe I have it, to Bill Smythe, suggesting multiple large tracks around the country for racing.
All right.
And this was, you can have that too, that's an extra.
All right, well, maybe we'll wrap the interview up then, and
Okay.
thanks very much. Did you have any questions, David? Okay, well, then we'll turn this off. Thanks very much.
And there's the souvenir program from the first 500-mile race, which was run by Mark Donahue.
Why 1776? Did I miss something?
Had something to do with Schaefer, I don't know.
Okay. Huh.
We were July 71 was the event, and you will not see my picture in here.
By this point, you were gone.
Well, I was still around, but I wasn't being given information. Yeah, my picture's down here at the bottom of this page. I was still a director.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right, well, I'm going to turn this off. Thanks very much, David.
You're quite welcome.